think to begin with, I had contact with my local support group and I got a lot of support and help from them. Just the fact that you're speaking to somebody else who has went through the same things as you're going through, you're realising how they're coping with it and getting on with their lives, so that gives you the confidence to do the same.
We had a pilot project over on the island of Bute where we used telehealth care home monitoring to support people with respiratory conditions, and we had a few really good stories, but we had one gentleman in particular who shared his story with us very freely. He had been a very fit gentleman and his disease had progressed to such a state that he had to give up his home because he couldn't manage the garden anymore, and eventually he couldn't really get out of the house because he'd lost the confidence. His family lived on the mainland and he had stopped going to visit family. He was terrified of being out of the house. He was frightened of being away from the island because he was in and out of hospital so often. He needed his GP frequently, and he just didn't have the confidence to leave the island in case something happened to him. We installed a telehealth monitor into him, and he was quite excited about it at first, but I think, as everybody was, not sure how that really was going to help him self-manage, but it went in to manage his condition. I saw him I didn't see him in the early stages, but I saw him about 6 months after the equipment had gone in, and he shared his story with us at that time. This man was a new man. He'd been interviewed on national TV. He had been off the island, he'd been visiting his family. He was self-managing in such a way that he barely needed to use the equipment any longer. He was going out, he was socialising again. He was managing his condition. He had had reduced his visits to GP practice. He hadn't been admitted within that 6-month period, which was very unusual for him. He was a different gentleman. He was a much more settled, happy man. And I met him again about 4 months later, and he'd just come back from a cruise. So not only had he managed to leave the island, he'd actually managed to leave the country. And that was a real success story. The health pod, as we call it, takes you through a series of questions on a daily basis. And the more these questions are repeated, the more people have an awareness of their condition and the early triggers that can actually mean that their condition is going to exacerbate into a problem. So he was actually starting to recognise some of the triggers before he was actually putting the information into the pod, and he was no longer really needing to use the pod at all. So a great success story, and just shows that how a small piece of equipment could actually support somebody to self-manage.
Many years ago, when I was doing a diabetes clinic in a hospital, I saw a patient who his blood sugar levels and his blood pressure weren't very well controlled, and I spent a lot of time explaining to him the importance of a healthy lifestyle and explaining to him what a healthy diet would mean and what he should do for his life. And of course I think that was entirely meaningless to him because when I went up to the canteen at lunchtime, there he was with a Himalayan portion of chips on his plate, and it was almost as if he couldn't understand or didn't want to take on what I had said, and so it was actually a complete waste of time, and the time would have been much better spent if I had listened to him to find out what was important in his life, and then we would have had a much more meaningful discussion about what he could do to improve his life. And you can only do that really through listening to patients. I saw somebody recently, and they had chronic kidney disease, CKD, and they had seen their specialist, who felt that they should go on some more blood pressure tablets to lower their blood pressure. And the patient came back to see me a few weeks ago and said, oh, I didn't take the tablets, I didn't really want to take them. So I spent some time asking why she didn't want to take the tablets, and she came up with some very good reasons. And then I was able to explain to her why I felt the tablets would be very useful for her. And at the end of that conversation she said, "Okay, I'll take the tablets." And I said to her, "What made the difference? Why didn't you take the tablets when the specialist said? But you have quite happy to take them when I recommended them." And she said, "The difference was, Doctor, was that you were interested in me." And I think that was a very powerful lesson. And I think sometimes where we go wrong is we are only interested in making recommendations from the guidelines, and we're not particularly interested in the person who we're making the recommendations to. And so if I was wanting colleagues to do more, I think a key message would be to show a great interest in the person that you have in front of you, and then you'll find that they will be empowered and more able to stick to treatments. So it's, again, a win-win.